Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, lessons from the study of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis of blessed memory, a podcast addressing today's trends and headlines through interviews and conversations with Jewish leaders, inspired by the works of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis that make Jewish wisdom more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to today's complicated world. Our guests share their Jewish journeys and discuss how Rabbi Schulweis's wisdom provides inspiration and guidance to us today. Hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach, Senior Rabbi at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California, and board member of the Harold M. Schulweis Institute, an affiliate of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California.
Hello, welcome, shalom. I'm so excited to share this episode of Moral Courage with all of you. Our guest is the incredible Janice Kamenir-Reznik, who took Rabbi Schulweis's idea, one of his sermons, and turned it into an incredible and huge organization, Jewish World Watch, that's defined LA Jewry for more than 20 years. You'll hear how she did this and the moral courage she showed along the way, as well as some great stories about her friend, her mentor, Rabbi Harold Schulweis. I feel so lucky to be here right now. Hi, Janice. How are you?
Hi, Ari. It's my luck, not yours.
With the iconic, the legendary, my cousin, Janice Kamenir-Reznik. Thank you for joining us today in this conversation. We're going to talk about Rabbi Schulweis, your connection to Rabbi Schulweis, but especially, I think, focusing on two parts of it. The first is Jewish World Watch, the 2004 sermon that launched an incredible organization. Can you take us back and talk about how did that happen? How did you get brought into it? Who approached whom? How did that start?
I actually remember the phone call. And I mean, this is a revelation because a lot of people think I was out of the blue listening to the sermon, as I do every high holidays and beyond, and felt inspired by it, which I always do and did. But in this case, Rabbi Schulweis called me one day and he asked me a question that I had not only no answer to, I didn't understand the question. And the question was, what have you done about the genocide in Darfur? And I said, what is Darfur? What genocide are you talking about? I'm sitting here practicing law, just doing my own thing. And what is this? He says, well, I want to talk to you. Can you come into my office? And the next day, of course, Rabbi Schulweis calls, and it's a great honor to be able to talk to him and hear what he has to say. It's always important and significant. So I went to his office and he gave me an article from the New York Times. At that time, I had not been reading the New York Times. And it was an article how 100,000, I think already 100,000 people had been murdered in Darfur. And not only did I not know about it, nobody knew about it. Rabbi Schulweis never touched a computer in his life. And there are many people who, are on the computer all day long, even back in 2004. You didn't hear a word about Darfur. I'd never heard of it. Nobody ever mentioned it. And he gave me the article to read. And then I had this epiphany at that moment. It was one of those flashes in your brain, like in a cartoon strip. Sometimes you see, the thought bubble that's, with all kinds of exclamation points around it. And the thought bubble for me was, oh my God, all these people have been killed. I didn't know a thing about it. And I consider myself, a relatively aware, alert person with a conscience. And I said, how am I any different than all those people during the Holocaust around the world who we all accuse of having done nothing while 6 million of our brothers and sisters were murdered? Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they weren't paying attention. Maybe they weren't reading. Maybe they weren't inquiring, just like I hadn't been. And so I had that epiphany and I said, it's all never again is not only about, and this was one of Rabbi Schulweis's great teachings, the words never again is not only about the Jewish people not enduring genocide, it's about never again being idle, standing idly by in the face of genocide. So that was the conversation. He then told me on Rosh Hashanah that year, he was going to be giving a sermon about this topic and he was proposing an organization or a committee at the temple, I think is what he originally proposed, called Jewish World Watch. And he wanted to know if I would be willing to work on it. And of course, like any human being that has any conscience at all or any intelligence at all, Rabbi Schulweis asked you to do something, it's really important. And I said yes. That was like a week before Rosh Hashanah that year. It was in the end of August. And
so why you? Why did he call? I mean, you get things done, obviously, but you're a practicing attorney. If I were doing something this big and meaningful. I don't know if I'd think of calling somebody who's in the middle of their career. I might call somebody who's thinking about retirement and go, "Do you want your next chapter?" Do you know what was your relationship before that he thought to call you?
Well, we had a relationship. I mean, back in the days before I was a lawyer, I did Jewish communal work, and I worked as the director of the Commission on Soviet Jewry for the Jewish Federation. And I had contact with him then, and all my years at VBS, which were at the time probably 20 years at VBS, I had contact with him on various important social issues. He knew that I believed in social justice and that I aspired to have a good conscience and to act on it. And he must have also been prescient because I was really dying to wind down my law career. I just wasn't sure what I was going to be doing next. I felt like everybody can practice law in LA. So many people practice law. It wasn't as critical that I continue doing that, especially since my husband was willing to continue doing that. I didn't need to. It was just such an incredible, I don't want to call it opportunity. It was, I guess, an opportunity to exercise conscience and in a really significant way. So, and maybe he knew that I would be, that I had it in me to be able to leave my practice and dedicate myself to something more important. And he was right.
How did it go from a committee at the synagogue to, within very short time, 60 something synagogues around the greater Los Angeles area, all working together and lobbying and getting senators and members of Congress to join you in the fight? Who took it from an idea at VBS to something global?
I mean, I'm sure Rabbi Schulweis wanted it to be something global from the beginning, but I didn't want to scare me off. So he talked about a committee at the temple. But, I think he and I both discussed that this is something so big, so much beyond a synagogue's work. And it's such an important issue for the Jewish community to deal with the issue of genocide that it can't just be organizing within our synagogue. And so he and I both agreed one by one to call the rabbis within a couple weeks' time. And every single rabbi said yes. I mean, every synagogue with one exception. I won't mention who that one exception because that might be in the realm of Rechilut or Lashon Hara. But they all said yes, and they all put it out to their members. We asked them to have at least 2 representatives of their synagogue to come to an initial organizing meeting. And there it was. We had 60, 70, 80 people come to that initial meeting saying, what can we do to get our synagogue membership involved? And then we were really under the gun. We really needed to move forward in a aggressive way through various people taking responsibility for different aspects, with us, really me being, sort of the one who was managing the day-to-day growth and development of the organization.
And then how long before you started hiring people saying this is beyond a one-person job?
Yeah, it took about a year. It took about a year to have the resources to hire people. But I want to make really clear that Rabbi Schulweis, this was not the kind of thing he sort of said, will you do this? And he stepped away from it. He was involved every single day with the growth of Jewish World Watch. He made calls. He was very passionate about this at the time. I mean, at the time, there was much less anti-Semitism. It was sort of a non-issue. Israel was not in a state of crisis like it is today. And the Jews were sitting pretty in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things that, if you ask me what motivated him, far be it from me to read his mind, but I think he was pretty clear about the importance of Jews looking outside of ourselves. One of the most enlightening comments he always made was, he would ask the question, what is the most important architectural component in a synagogue? And people would usually say the Torah, the Ark, the eternal light. No, it was the window that let the light in and it made you see out. And that it was just the way he believed. He used to say, you've got to read the Torah and the LA Times together. You don't read the Torah without the newspaper. It's all about, if you can't apply it to today's life, then all it is a beautiful sort of historic, lyrical lesson. And it's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a way to live your life.
Right.
So, he was very passionate about those principles, and he wanted people in his congregation as a rabbi to not just be worried about their bar mitzvah parties and how many people would be in the band at the wedding and how many courses you were going to serve at your festivities. Not that he was against celebrate, but
Right.
that shouldn't be the be all and end all of your enthusiasm for Judaism. It's got to be about exercising conscience and a living Torah.
I mean, I've reread the sermon a dozen times. When I was working with Jewish World Watch, I read it a lot because I thought it's our mission statement almost, our 5,000 word mission statement. And it starts, his opening line is, "Don't throw away the newspaper." And to think of that as also a Jewish text, to think of what our job is, what's happening in the world, to think of where the origins of Judaism, God speaking to Abraham and Sarah and saying, "Be a blessing." It's not be a blessing for Jews, and God isn't the king of the Jews. God is the ruler of the universe. And if this is all God's realm, if every person's in God's image, you see the world differently. Do you remember any blowback at the time? Like, Rabbi, why are you not talking about the Holocaust, Israel? I mean, not that anti-Semitism was so big then, but it's existed for thousands of years. Was there blowback saying, "Rabbi, come on, we're helping Muslim people in Africa. Don't we have bigger things to do?"
Yes, there was blowback. It was not universal blowback. I mean, most people who belong to VBS and who were engaged with Jewish World Watch obviously saw the mission the same as Rabbi Schulweis did, or you do, or I did. But there were plenty of people who would say, "Oh, I didn't even know there were any Jews in Darfur," assuming that the only genocides that we would care about are genocides targeted at Jews. Or people would say, let the non-Jews and the Muslims deal with Arab or Muslim suffering, and Jewish funds should go to deal with not only Jewish suffering but continuity issues and engagement issues. And his other big thing, I mean, there's so many philosophical brilliances which we live our lives by that where Rabbi Schulweis says it's never either or, it's always both and. We do not abandon. I mean, it seems so pediatric, but one of the great Pirkei Avot lines is, "If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I?" And then, of course, if not now, when? But the first two, yes. If you are only for yourself, what are you? You're an egomaniac. You're a narcissist. But on the other hand, we can't abandon ourselves in service of others because that presents its own issues. You've got to embrace the needs of your community and be loyal and faithful to that mission. And part of the needs of our community and the mandate is to have a conscience exercised in the world. And he always, said that the world wasn't created as a Jewish world. That we came later. It was not created Jewish. It was created as a universe. And it's not all about us. And sometimes Jews, maybe it's PTSD, maybe it's just centuries of being, battered and nobody else caring, that we have this feeling that, nobody else cares about us, so we have to only care about us. I mean, it's a little bit of a pathology. I sort of understand it, especially, victims of the Holocaust. They felt so isolated and abandoned. I get that. But if you look at the bigger meaning, that doesn't mean it's supposed to be that way. It's not supposed to be that way. And we like to live our lives not only in what is, but what should be. Should we aspire towards? And if we are looking at it that way, we should aspire to love ourselves and love others, because that is sort of foundational to having a conscience and it's about humanity. Having humanity.
One of the words that I think of so much when I think of Rabbi Schulweis is the word "ought," which he said in his Bronx accent. It came out much better than that. But this idea of what ought the world to be, and our prophets of the Bible were trying to create the world that ought to be, and we're trying so hard to make that come into fruition by the work that we're doing. And if all we care about is ourselves, it's just not enough. And I think about all the people who had a hard time with Jewish World Watch because it wasn't focusing on Judaism, except then to think of how many people, and we'll get to my story maybe, but how many people were inspired to embrace Judaism, maybe for the first real time, to look at it seriously because of Jewish World Watch. because it wasn't just going to shul and hearing the same prayers over and over and hearing a sermon that doesn't affect my life, but to go, yeah, the world, I could make a difference. Judaism has something to say about the world that we live in today and tomorrow, and every day you can think about how Judaism, this ancient culture and religion, affects can bring about a world of change. To talk about my story a little bit, I was working in the film industry, and my mom said, and I wasn't happy, and as nobody is in the film industry, and my mom said, "Come to shul. Janice is coming to speak about her trip to the refugee camps outside Darfur." I was like, "I'm not going to shul. You can't. Why would somebody who's in their 20s who go to a conservative synagogue?" Um, but I went. I finished my work for whatever reason on that Saturday morning, and I went. And you were there, fresh back from Chad and Jamena, and seeing the refugee camps and telling the story. And I just thought, wait, this is meaningful. This is real. And I went back to work the next day and wrote down all the things that I did for the producer I was working for, and I was like, I'm doing nothing at work, and you are saving lives. And everything I did at work was like, this is life or death, get it done now. And it wasn't. It was to make movies that nobody cared about, to make TV shows that would never see the light of day. And I quit my job that day, and I emailed you and said, I heard you speak. Can I volunteer? And your response was something like, why don't you come have a meeting with the executive director, with Sivia, because you don't have to volunteer. We could hire you. I thought I'm just going to do this for 2 weeks and cleanse my soul and go back to the film industry. And you, Rabbi Shulweiss, Jewish World Watch, gave my life purpose. And I'm currently right now speaking from Camp Alanim, where we spend our summer now. And so much of what I did at camp was, how do we bring this message that you and Rabbi Shulweiss created and bring it to young people? How do we go to summer camps and Jewish day schools and non-Jewish day schools and churches and explain to them there is a crisis happening in the world that nobody's talking about. You should pay attention.
Right.
And to bring up the Holocaust and Rwanda and Cambodia and Guatemala. And there was a time I could have named every major mass atrocity of the last 100 years and say, we did nothing. We sat by and watched Rwanda happen. We sat by and watched Cambodia. Can we do something about this one? At some point, you took a step back from Jewish World Watch and went on like so many other Rabbi Shulweiss-esque projects. What was your relationship once Jewish World Watch was blossoming and it was growing and people are talking about it? What was his role in it from there? What was your relationship with him from there?
First of all, Rabbi Shulweiss stayed as an active member of our board until he died.
Yeah.
Just a few weeks before his death, he was at a meeting, and we talked every day. He wanted to know what was happening. He wanted to know if we were successful with our speeches, our fundraising. He wanted to know everything. When he died, Malka came on our board and took his place. And she sat on the board until she got too sick to be able to participate. So it was very Shulweissian, for many, many years. What happened for me was I realized that unless I'm able to transfer leadership to another group of people, the long-term success of the organization would be in jeopardy, because no organization should really depend upon one leader for too long of a period of time. And as it was 10 years that I was board chair and more. I was a very engaged and active board chair. I was also the co-founder, which meant, I was all over it all the time, which wasn't so easy for the staff. It was a challenge because you have the founder, board chair. We at that time had like 8 or 10 people already on, or 7 or 8, 10, I don't know, some people on staff. We had a decent sized budget in excess of $1 million. We were funding all kinds of projects on the ground in Congo, and in Chad for the refugees in Chad, and for rape recovery victims, mostly women's empowerment projects in Congo. It was a lot, and we had a very good board, but as long as I was so central to it, a lot of people deferred to me. At the time, it's going to sound sort of funny, but I didn't know how to extricate myself and really pass the torch. It was very challenging. And their
Yeah.
books are written on this subject. How do you get founders sort of extricated? I mean, a lot of times the founders don't want to extricate. They don't have the training I had in social work school of the importance of not having one person sort of consume the leadership and the power in an organization. I knew it was wrong. So I actually figured that the only way I could really get out from under would be to run for public office, which I did and did not succeed with that effort. But it was a great way to move other leaders in, and it was very effective. So they knew as of a certain date I was campaigning and I would be out of the loop, and they could consult me in an emergency if they really needed to, but by and large they would have to take it from there. And they did. And so we had, other people on the board who stepped in and became the leaders of the organization. It still succeeded. So I did that. And after I didn't win for public office, which I'm very glad I didn't, with everything that unfolded since then, came another chapter in my life, and that was when the current president was elected the first time. I had a very strong reaction, as did many other people, about the initial Muslim travel ban. When it felt very close to home. We all know the stories about Jews not being permitted into the country, even to save their lives during the Holocaust, and all the stories of discrimination. We thought that was not only unconstitutional, and it was unconstitutional, but it was also terrible to take one whole group of people and pass a law or an edict that they would not be able to come in or out of the country safely. So we started an organization, and I say organization loosely because it's really more of a lecture series, called Jews United for Democracy and Justice. And that was about sort of using our voice to be able to educate and engage people on the problems with authoritarianism. And that organization, called, the acronym is JUDGE, continues to exist. We're now in our 8th year. We started in 2017. And in 2020, when COVID came, we went online. Until 2020, it was an in-person program at various synagogues in LA, sort of using the Jewish World Watch model of engaging synagogues. And we had about 10 synagogues as members. And that would mean that we could do programming in their synagogue and bring these great speakers who would talk about democracy and the pitfalls of autocracy into their synagogues. And we were doing very well for about 3 years. Every 3 or 4 months, we'd have a program that would attract upwards of 800 people. And in LA, that's a lot because they have to drive through horrendous traffic where they're going. So it was a real commitment. It showed that there was a real appetite for that kind of programming. And then when March 2020 came, the late David Lehr, who was one of my key partners in this project, it was David Lehr, Zev Yaroslavsky, Mel Levine, the former congressman, and me. David and I were sort of the working people in that group. I mean, the day-to-day working people. He subsequently passed away, which is just awful. But back then in March 2020, he said, well, let's go online and do it. It'll be 3-4 weeks of quarantine, and let's do it once a week because people will be bored. And this is a great opportunity for them to have some stimulation. So we started, and that was like 320 programs ago. I mean, now every single Wednesday night for the past 5.5 years, we've had Wednesday nights from 5 to 6 Pacific. We get 5,000 people online from all over the country. In fact, we have an Australian contingent and lots of Canadians and Mexicans and people from different places. And we have the most incredible speakers every single Wednesday.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, really, really high level people. I remember I was visiting friends in Chicago, and I went to the synagogue, and I just hear the people at the table next to me talking about the JUDJ program. I was thinking, like, wow, they don't know that I'm at all connected, but here's these people who, this is where they find their sanity. This is where they get to hear top level people having honest conversations, not a talking head for 3 minutes on the news, but a real conversation about what's happening in the world, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in America. It's been incredible.
yes, it's been a great journey. Now, if you look at parallels, around the same time of COVID beginning, the COVID quarantine beginning, Jewish World Watch took a terrible hit from COVID because our strategy was grassroots community organizing. as
Right.
you know, because you did most of it or a lot of it, going onto campuses, going into schools, going into places where there are people that want to engage or trying to motivate them to engage. It was all very personal. And starting March 2020, all that was just suddenly ended. And the Zoom system had not yet developed enough to be able to know how to do community organizing virtually. That's really hard. I mean, it's not just having a lecture, it's actually inspiring people to action virtually. That's more of a science. And I still don't know how to do that. I mean, yes, it works. Some people say Arab Spring was a community organizing effort that was done virtually. Yes, I mean, that's different. That was in the middle of a revolution. This was not a revolution. This was a sustainable organization that was doing consistent grassroots organizing. And now we couldn't do that in the same way. And schools were sort of scrambling to how to continue their academics online. I mean, it was a very chaotic time for schools and really bad for community organizations that were grassroots oriented. And then the next major hit to Jewish World Watch was October 7th. October 7th is horrible from every possible angle one could look at. But right now we're talking about specifically Jewish World Watch. At least half of our energy and our work came from college campuses. And now you have college campuses after October 7th being the hotbed of major anti-Semitic problems and major demonstrations and dangerous conditions. The last thing any mother would want their child to do is to go out and start having a Jewish kid, 18 years old, talking about the Darfur genocide. And all of a sudden, they're the target of accusations of genocide in Israel and Gaza. And that presented a huge, huge challenge for Jewish World Watch as well. So we've been struggling with that, in addition to the fact that Jewish energies since October 7th have really changed, so that there is more money that needs to be spent on uniquely Jewish problems. I mean, just the very fact that $300 million at the Weizmann Institute the other day was blown up. I mean, all that community dollars are being spent on, replacing Jewish institutions, on dealing with anti-Semitism and trying to get a handle on how to go about ebbing the flow of, hate. It's just a whole different universe in so many ways that we have some very faithful donors, but somebody who's not super committed, we're not going to be their first choice now to talk, to donate funds to. Now, we never asked to be anybody's first choice. I mean, it's fine if it's not your first. We can be your third choice. We can be your fifth, as long as we're on the list of things you care about. But right now, it's just very hard. Jews are very sensitive about what's going on with us. And I get that. I'm sensitive about it too. And the best advice we got from, many scholars and rabbis is right now to really lay low until the Jewish community gets more of a handle on its own issues. So it's just been very challenging. By the way, our projects in the refugee camps continue. Our projects in Congo are continuing. I mean, that's a whole other problem. There's a massive killing going on right now.
Right.
And another couple 100,000 people have been murdered. So there's just terrible problems going on in the same region that we worked in. And we can't be as effective as we were because we used to go there every year and investigate and look and see and develop our projects with the people in the refugee camps. For the last 8 years or so, because of the horrible violence there, we have not been able to go. But, there's just a lot of new challenges for Jewish World Watch that we're trying to figure out. But we still have our operational projects with several organizations that are locally operating that are struggling themselves on because they've lost so much funding as well, because people's priorities change and people get sick of problems. And, that's the other thing. It's like part of the lesson of Jewish World Watch is not to think of things as one and done, because one and done is usually nonsense. One and done is ephemeral. Whatever benefits you've created have very little sustaining power if all you do is one and done, especially for an organization like Jewish World Watch, the goal of which was to help people deal with their attitudes of filling their soul with a conscience that cares about other people. I mean, this is a very deep idea that doesn't happen by somebody going to one demonstration or giving us $100. This is has to be a sustained effort, a sustained conversation, a sustained engagement. And
Yeah.
we were really good at that. We had some people that started with us and, as 12-year-olds, did a bar mitzvah project with us and stayed with us through college and brought Jewish World Watch to their high school and brought Jewish World Watch to their college. I mean, at one point we were in, I don't know, 30 or 40 colleges around the country because of our graduates from LA, from
Right.
a New Jew or from Milken or from Cleveland, any school that we had a connection with.
Yeah.
Some, if a few kids came out of that sustained it for 10 years, I mean, that gives us the leverage is amazing from the
Right.
energy that we got from our teens. So anyway, these are very, very challenging times for an organization like ours. And a lot of rabbis, and I'm sure you among them, Ari, struggle with how to phrase non-Jewish issues right now in terms of what your congregation can handle. People are feeling vulnerable. They're feeling overtaxed. They're feeling scared about our democracy, scared about the Jewish place in America, and scared about Israel. I mean, it's such a frightening time that
Right.
this is not just a Jewish World Watch problem. This is a problem.
Sure. But it's also, as a person of conscience, as a person who worked with Jewish World Watch, as a person who cares about humanity in the world, it's insult to injury to see what's happening in Congo, in Darfur, still elsewhere around the world that gets no media attention. And here's all of my friends and all these celebrities and whoever else who have very strong feelings about what's happening in Israel and have nothing to say about what's happening in the sustained violence
Right.
elsewhere in the world. And if Jews aren't involved, then we don't have to get involved in what's happening in some small corner of DRC. And it's just really hard that it doesn't get the attention that it deserves, and not only because of Jewish World Watch, but as a Jew, it really hurts because I know that these people who aren't Jewish are pointing fingers at us, and yet there's so much else happening in the world that is really so central right now, so important right now, that gets nothing.
Well, that old Yiddish saying, "Schwer zu sein a Yid." It's hard to be a Jew, and I think that right now it's really hard to be a Jew, especially a more progressive-minded Jew, because progressives are under fire for being anti-Israel. If you look at the left wing,
Sure.
left part of the Democratic Party, campuses are notoriously left anyway, and they become more so. And you feel for the Zionist kids, which to me, most Jews I know are Zionists. We all believe in the right of Israel to exist and the need for a Jewish state. And the need for a Jewish state, not just the right of Israel to exist, because we mean Israel as a Jewish state. That, to me, that's how you define a Zionist. It's really difficult, and it is very frustrating that, not that I'm condoning Israel's conduct, because I don't like a lot of the stuff that was done and is being done. And before the Gaza war, before October 7th, I was unhappy with the efforts to undermine the judicial system in Israel. I mean, those are all problematic. But what Israel is doing, I have confidence to say that it's not a genocide. We know it's not a genocide because our purpose isn't to destroy the Palestinian people. Our purpose is to secure safety for Israel and defense of Israel. So it's very frustrating that people call that a genocide. It means they don't really understand the word genocide. And it's frustrating that they don't see that, in fact, many of, Iran in particular, and many of the Iran's proxies, such as Hamas, are talking about wanting to destroy Israel. And when destroying Israel means destroying the Jewish people. So that is an intention to commit genocide. And nobody sees it that way. They have no sensitivity. They see the Palestinians as an underdog and Jew as an aggressor. And in simple-minded thinking and black and white thinking, where people don't see the majority, which is gray, because everything's gray. Black and white don't really exist, except if you're a very extreme-minded person. Everything is complex. Everything requires more than a 3-minute conversation. And it's frustrating. They don't see the horrors in the rest of the world and just point to what's going on in Gaza. It's very disturbing to me.
And in an Instagram box, the one picture you could put there doesn't say enough for a conversation about what's actually happening on the ground. And it's is really easy for a college student to go, I saw this one picture and it was heartbreaking, and therefore this was going on. And you go, yeah, most of the people in Knesset also disagree with what's happening in the war right now. Like it's so much more nuanced than all
I
this.
mean, the food thing really got to me because I don't know the truth. I don't know really about, the accusations that Israel's starving the Gazans. And I don't know the truth because it's really hard to get to the truth because everybody is so biased already on their positions. I think that Israel doesn't always handle things in the best way for media attention, and we really lose the PR battle most of the time. Sometimes we also lose the battle because we're making really bad decisions, and there are better ways to do things, at least in my opinion, but nobody consults with me. I just raise the policy. But I do have a certain level of confidence that Israel is not committing genocide. That I feel without even knowing facts.
Right.
I mean, I just have to, because I know enough about Israel and the Jewish people and the mission. That doesn't mean I like what a lot of what this government's doing there. I find it very objectionable in so many ways. But to say that they're committing genocide, but it's really easy to say that. I mean, yesterday on the 405, I was coming home from the city, and there was a big banner right at sunset on the overpass, a big banner saying, "Stop funding Israel. Israel is committing genocide." I mean, right there, where
Right. I mean,
right there in West LA, where half the Jews
sure.
in LA live. And
Right.
it's so provocative. It's so easy to say and so difficult to combat once that word is out there.
Right. And what a distraction from other things that are really pressing. This is so meaningful. Where does it come from for you? You working with Soviet Jewry, working with Jewish World Watch, working with Beit Teshuvah, working with JUDJ, where does this drive? Who brought it into you? Is it innate? Was it how you were raised?
Yes. I mean, my family, I'm one of 5 kids, brought up here in Los Angeles my whole life since I was about 9 months old. And we were brought up with the notion of service. I mean, service and democracy and voting and participating in your community, such that if I remember as a kid, my mother said so and so, because she used to walk for the League of Women Voters to make sure people are
Mhm.
voting on election day. And it was like scandalous when she would come and say, "Did you know that so and so didn't cast their ballot?" I mean, that was like a shonda. That was
Right.
a major problem. I mean, being involved and engaged, I saw it. My parents lived their life that way and instilled those values in us. And it took with me, and it took with most of my siblings. We all do a lot of service oriented work, each one in their own way. And it was just a big emphasis. And we grew up around a synagogue. We grew up at Sinai Temple, and we were all, it was just inculcated as a very natural part of our life. And my parents were just, they never asked us to do anything that they weren't doing themselves. So, they didn't drop us off at services on Saturday mornings. We went to services. We may have had what they used to call Saturday school, which was services, but in the context of Hebrew school, and they went to services. So, we just saw there was a lot of authenticity in what we were being taught. And it just became very much part of our souls and our beings in my family. So I would attribute that to my parents and the job that they did of living authentic lives and not getting so wound up in their jobs. My dad was a dentist. Of course, he later became a lawyer, and he was a builder. He was a lot of things. He did a lot of things, but his main passion was Jewish community building. And in fact, when I say building, I mean construction. So he used his general contracting license, other than to build him and my mom a home. His other use of it was to be able to build Camp Ramah, to build the University of Judaism up on Mulholland, to build Sinai Temple's Akiba Academy. I mean, that's what he did with his contracting license, and he loved it. He just loved building them. He built, and his final project was the new cemetery in Simi Valley, which they named the chapel after him as the Kamenir Chapel. So, I mean, I think, and my mother raised 5 kids. She was a teacher before she had kids. As soon as the last kid was out, she went back, got her degree in gerontology, and is still to this day, at 101 years old, the longest serving volunteer at Jewish Family Service, where she, for 40 years, or 35 years, she was actually a counselor. And then my dad got sick, and my dad said, I think I need, as an aging, dying person, I think I need some attention. So she ended up stopping her work there, but she continued on the board, and she still goes to board meetings. And before my father died, he created a volunteer award in my mother's name. And every year around end of May, beginning of June, they do the volunteer lunch. And last week at 101 years old, she didn't walk, she ran up to confer the award and to give a speech on the meaning of volunteerism. Which I think inspired, everybody in the room. But it inspires and informs and creates who her kids are. I mean, I don't know if I can be as successful with my kids or their kids, but in my household, that was just our lifestyle, volunteerism.
Yeah, and it shows. I mean, it's incredible. Um, what's something about Schulweis the person that you think about that maybe the person in the kahal in the community, the person who reads his books or poetry wouldn't know? What's something about him that you think about?
First of all, when I first joined the temple, he was brilliant and inspiring, but he was very distant. And it was very hard to connect with him. I felt it was way beyond my intellectual capacity. It was so remote that because he was very intellectual and uses very big words, some of which I didn't know what the words meant. I'd have to go home and look up words, which was great.
Right.
It was great for my Scrabble game. But I think one of the things that is most remarkable about him in the last 20 years or so of his life, he really became much more down to earth in terms of intellectually, and much more relatable on a friend basis, where he could sit and schmooze with people. It didn't have to be highfalutin and intellectual. And I think that's something, I think a lot of people at the temple observed that he became more, I don't even know what the word more or less of something, but more approachable, less intellectual, more emotional, more connected. And I loved that I was able to be privy to that kind of increasingly connected relationship where I would just go schmooze with him in his office. We even talked about weight once because I was upset that I had gained some weight. And we talked about whether people feel loved more when they're thinner versus fatter. And, just issues like that, which are, it's about vanity, it's about self-consciousness, it's about sexuality, it's about all those sort of normal everyday things that are part of people's lives. And, there was I'm sure he could have written a book about it or read one anyway and written sermons about it. But it was just a conversation like you'd have with any friend. And, that was a real blessing for me to have that kind of relationship, that I saw that about him. And he was a really good friend. I mean, he was a good friend. If you needed something, if you needed someone to talk to, my father really loved Rabbi Schulweis. And my father was not a member of Valley Beth Shalom. But if I would call, when my dad became sick, if I would call and ask Rabbi Schulweis to go visit with him or just to call him and talk to him, he did it. I mean, it was just such an act of friendship and love. So I think that's something maybe not everybody got to experience that. I was very blessed to, but I think, a lot of people did. The other thing that was great about both Malka and Rabbi Schulweis, who I will never in my life call Harold, but some people do, which it always shocks me. But when they moved, they had a beautiful home in Encino, and Malka was an incredible, meticulous housekeeper where everything was perfect and gorgeous and shined and just the most beautiful things. And they had a very beautiful partnership between the two of them. And she recognized that they would not be able to maintain that beautiful household forever. So long before either of them was sick, they moved to Fountain View. And we talked a lot about that. I talked a lot about it with Malka, and I talked a lot about it with him. It was really admirable to me. It's a very hard thing to do if you're a real balabusta, if you really love your home, to give that up, to give up the space. She loved her garden. And I really admired that about both of them. And each of them thought they were doing it for the other, which was really sweet also. And he would say, well, I don't want Malka to have to work so hard to be able to maintain the house. And she would say, well, I see he's slowing down. He needs more help. I want to be in a place that isn't new to him as he declines. So there was something so beautiful and loving about that. That was a really, really beautiful thing to see and to learn from.
When I needed somebody to walk me down the aisle at ordination. You had to pick a rabbi. And I wanted Rabbi Schulweis because he was part of my life from my birth. And then when he passed away, I had Malka walk me down the aisle.
I remember.
And when I told that idea to Rabbi Artson, our dean, he started crying. I mean, just how beautiful. And Malka was an incredible partner for him. I think as a child, I conflated Rabbi Schulweis and your father. They had, they both had, I mean, they were similar age. They both had this presence, this stateliness about them, this gravitas that every word that they said was a gem. Their voices were very different. They were different in so many ways, but they both had this incredible depth to them. And to sit at their, I mean, as a kid, what kid wants to listen to, like, old people? And I would sit there just like listening to the two of them talk, because they're just sitting in your backyard talking theology. They're sitting there, I mean, just everything was so real and so deep and so meaningful. And both people who kind of inspire me in so much that I do. So one of the last questions we ask, what's a text that speaks to you? What are you learning or reading right now?
First of all, I keep Rabbi Schulweis's book of poetry in death-related poetry. I forget exactly what it's called. It's a beautiful book that the Schulweis Institute actually published. I keep that very close at hand, and I bought about 20 of them at one point, and whenever a friend loses somebody, I always share that book, and it's always meaningful. I just love the poetry, and I read his poetry, and I use his poetry when I'm creating my own speeches or my own presentations, that I find it very meaningful. But I'll tell you one of the texts that I haven't referred to, that it has new meaning because of Rabbi Schulweis and my work with Jewish World Watch. And I'll first say it in Hebrew because I just think it sounds so beautiful. Lo alecha hamalacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin levatel mimena. It is not, it's from the Talmud, and it was Rabbi Tarfon who said, it is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you free to neglect it. And the reason I love that piece so much is everything is overwhelming. The problems we have in the world right now are so enormous, whether it's in Africa and the horrible genocides happening there, whether it's the mass rapes that are going on in Congo, whether it's the problems in Israel and Gaza or Israel and Iran. All over the world, we're bleeding, and not even to mention the huge problems we have with immigration and other really core issues right here at home. People
Right.
are frightened. And you say, Ben, and I mean, that's not even to mention the hostages. My husband got an email out of nowhere from a woman who he was from Israel until he was 9 years old, from the Kiryot right outside of Haifa. And there was a neighbor in the duplex they live in. He hasn't seen her. My husband is now 74 years old. So how many years? 60 some odd years. He had never heard from her or seen her. Today he got an email from her in Hebrew. Her grandson is one of the hostages still in Gaza. And she wants to talk to him to see what he can do to help. I mean, these are people who are every day for the last however many days. I forget the exact number. I shouldn't forget, but I did. There are so many big problems that we cannot solve. And a lot of people are deterred because the problems are so big, and whatever we do feels like a drop in the bucket. But the Talmud in its wisdom tells us that it doesn't matter how big the problem is. You can still do something. And I think everybody needs to understand, or should, or ought to really take that to heart, because if everybody does a little something, all of a sudden the little somethings add up to big somethings, and they do make a difference. There's that wonderful starfish story that's already so trite about the mound of starfish on the sand at the beach, and the little boy goes up and starts throwing them one by one in the water. His grandfather comes and said, what are you doing? Why are you bothering with that? It doesn't make a difference. And the little boy picks up the starfish, throws it in the water. He says, for that one, I just made a difference. And if you've got to think of things like that you are making a difference, which is why there's also that wonderful, if you've saved one person, you've saved the entire world. Our job is not to solve the whole problem, but that doesn't mean you don't have to do something about problems that you should perceive. So the first step is to be able to be conscious enough of what's going on around you to be able to know that there are problems. And the second is to develop the empathy and courage and conscience to figure out what to do about it, even if it's donating money or joining an organization or signing petitions or getting more immersed, like, like some of us do. So, but you don't have to do everything. That's why I said you don't have to. Like, I never wanted Jewish World Watch necessarily to be number one for a whole bunch of people. It was nice that it was number one, philanthropic interest for some people. But people say, how come you're not helping Israel? Well, how do you know I'm not helping Israel? Of course I'm helping Israel, but I'm also doing this. And the both and is really critical on all these fronts as well. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is the most profound, the deepening of my understanding of text and how it relates to current events is one of the gifts, one of the many, many gifts that is very enduring that I gleaned from my relationship over the years with Rabbi Schulweis. And through our work, and yours too, Ari, you did so much for Jewish World Watch. Through our work, imparting those values and inspiring other people, that's how people live on. That's what it means to leave a legacy and to have immortality, which is one of Rabbi Schulweis's great poems about immortality. Immortality is not about witchcraft. It's about leaving impressions on people after they've gone, and you're still thinking about them and what you've learned from them.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the immortality of influence constantly, and I use that idea that he brought up there um, with so many families, because that's right. It's not about immortality necessarily in the spiritual way, although maybe that too, but where do you
Certainly
hold
not in the corporeal way. I mean, it's not,
Right,
it's not about that. It's not a
right,
literal immortality, but it's much more important than literal, because you can have a body there and have nothing that is impacting. But if you have an idea, you can't kill an idea. And the ideas, go from generation to generation if you impart them.
right. When we think Kaddish Rabbanan, which is after we learn something, we thank our teachers and their teachers, and we think about our students and their students. And this lineage, I feel so grateful. I mean, every day, every Shabbos, every high holidays, that I am a student of Rabbi Schulweis, and that he was a student of Mordechai Kaplan, who was a student of, and we trace it in some way, even if we lose some of the middle ground, to Rabbi Tarfon, to Hillel, to all these great thinkers. And I think that Tarfon quote is so Schulweisian too, is you are not free to desist from caring about what's happening in the world. You can't fix the whole thing. Don't put it all on your shoulders. But find a Janice Kamenir-Reznik, and and you can get a lot done.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because the words "never again," which were sort of the adage of, post-Holocaust.
Yeah,
I mean, the insight is we can't control that there are additional genocides, that there's evil people in the world doing what evil people have done since time immemorial. We can only control how we respond to that evil. And, that was also very Schulweisian. He said, don't look for, don't just look at how awful things are. Look at the good in response to evil. Look at the righteous Gentiles that he was so influential in honoring. Look at the people that respond to the evil and find God there. Don't look for God in the Hitler. How could God have let Hitler happen? There can't be a God if Hitler happened. Well, could there be a God? There has to be a God that creates people willing to risk their lives to save other people. I mean, that's huge. That
yeah,
is, and we don't stop to see the miracle of that, the deep level of sensitivity and consciousness that is so godly in somebody being willing to risk their family's life to save another person.
right.
That's where God is. So, that was also one of the great, great lessons I learned from Rabbi Shoais. Don't look for God in the evil. Look for God in the response to evil.
Right, right. This idea of not where is God, but when is God? When do people show up and do what's beyond them? How do they show up and be godly and make God a verb?
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for talking.
And you represent to us the continuity of greatness. I mean, it's just amazing that I've seen your congregation, I've been to your congregation, and the way that you're able to instill such spirit and such love in that community is really awesome. So, kol hakavod to you.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us on Moral Courage. And thank you all for listening to this episode. May we all have the moral clarity, the courage to face the world this week. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Moral Courage podcast. We are produced by the Harold M. Schulweis Institute at Valley Beth Shalom, which supports these podcasts in addition to educational programs within Valley Beth Shalom, the Schulweis Library, changing exhibitions at the Liner Chapel at VBS, Jewish World Watch, and the Jewish Community Children's Choir. The Moral Courage podcast is hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach. Our consulting producer is Esther Kostanowitz. Our technical producer is Eric Weiser. We are grateful for the support of the Institute and Haley Lazitsky-Weiser at Sadcon Productions. To learn more about Rabbi Schulweis or to make a donation to help support these podcasts, visit the Institute website at hmsi.info.